We've all been there, haven't we? You're curious, you want to grasp something complex, but honestly, wading through dense reports or academic speak, it just feels overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely. You want those aha moments, right? The real insights, but without getting totally bogged down.
Exactly. And that's what we're aiming for today. We're doing a deep dive into a concept that's, well, it's pretty fascinating, but also maybe a little bit unsettling. It's called mediocracy.
And we're mostly going to be drawing from Alain Deneault's book, Mediocracy, The Politics of the Extreme Center. It's basically looking at how societies can end up being run, not by the most brilliant or, groundbreaking people.
But by those who are really good at fitting in, at keeping things just as they are.
Precisely. That's the core idea. How a system that really values the average, maybe even rewards just conforming, can lead to, well, mediocre people ending up in charge.
And Deneault looks at this from all sorts of angles, right? Sociology, politics, culture.
Yeah, it's quite wide-ranging. So our plan today is to sort of unpack the main arguments, connect the dots, and see how relevant this feels, all without needing a PhD to keep up.
Okay, sounds good. Let's start at the beginning then. What exactly is mediocrity, as Deneault describes it? Is it just a world full of average Joes?
Not quite. That's a really key distinction. It isn't just saying society lacks exceptional talent. It's more specific. He argues it's a system, one that actively favors, even promotes, a certain kind of average competence.
Okay.
And sometimes this favoring of the average actually pushes aside real excellence or, importantly, critical thinking or dissent.
So it's less about your individual skill level and more about how you succeed socially within that system by being reliably average.
That's a great way to put it. And interestingly, some of the praise for the book actually uses phrases like the extreme average or even an intolerant mediocrity.
The intolerant, wow.
Yeah, it suggests it's not just passively settling for the middle, but it can actively resist things that are too far outside the norm.
Okay, that leads into something else the book really digs into, the role of experts in all this. What's the critique there?
Well, Deneault, and he's sort of in line with thinkers like Edward Said here, looks critically at the modern idea of an expert. The argument is that often these experts prioritize fitting into professional norms, following the established methods, more than, say, genuine original thought or real intellectual curiosity.
Right, like Said worried about professionalism kind of taming the intellectual spirit, making marketability more important than critical thought.
Exactly that concern. So the expert isn't necessarily the person with the deepest insight, but maybe the one who's best at playing the game, at saying the expected things within that professional structure.
So they can end up just validating the existing system.
That's the worry. They can function to legitimize the powers that be or the dominant ideologies, maybe without even meaning to, simply by operating within those accepted boundaries rather than fundamentally questioning them.
Yeah, I can see how that could happen. And what does this mean for, actual work? For labor?
That's another big piece. He connects it to the division of labor, drawing on Marx, actually.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, the idea is that as work gets broken down into smaller and smaller super specialized tasks, people lose the big picture.
Right, you're just a cog.
Yeah. And your work becomes, as Marx put it, just a way to survive, a means of securing existence, not something you understand fully or take deep pride in.
So you lose that sense of accomplishment, maybe.
That, and he talks about the rise of what he calls feigned work.
Feigned work.
Yeah, like looking busy, going through the motions, creating the illusion of productivity without much real substance behind it.
Wow.
It kind of links to another idea, Enzensberger's secondary illiterate. Someone who technically knows things, but doesn't really question where that knowledge comes from or what it means.
Or like the Peter principle, people rising to their level of incompetence.
Exactly. You see echoes of that too, like in education systems sometimes, where maybe administrative skill gets valued over actual teaching insight.
Okay, so this leads to the idea of the game, right? This unspoken thing happening inside institutions. Tell us more about that.
Yes, the game. This is really central to his argument. He's saying that in a lot of places, companies, universities, government teaching it, there are these unwritten rules. And the rules are basically conform to the models, don't make waves, don't challenge the fundamentals. And following those rules is often the real path to success, maybe even more than actual skill or, sticking to principles.
Can you give an example? It sounds a bit abstract.
Sure. Think about maybe politicians feeling they have to listen to Wall Street, even if it might hurt regular people.
Okay.
Or picture a professor telling a bright student, no, don't pursue that really theoretical idea. It doesn't fit the grant criteria, or something like that.
Right, because it rocks the boat or doesn't fit the mold.
Precisely. There's this pressure to just play along, even if the rules seem kind of absurd. He even talks about this cynical awareness, like a perverse laughter among those playing it, who know it's a bit of a sham, but do it anyway to get ahead.
So the system itself becomes the priority over maybe doing the right thing or the smart thing.
That's the danger he points to. Maintaining the system, playing the game becomes paramount.
And universities. You'd hope they'd be different, but it sounds like they're caught up in this too.
Yeah, he argues they're definitely not immune. He sees universities increasingly driven by, like, a business logic.
Students as products. I think I've heard that kind of language.
Exactly. He quotes the rector of the Université de Montréal talking about tailoring brains to business needs. And this pressure means academics might focus heavily on getting grants, publishing papers, maybe quantity over quality.
The low-grade sausages analogy he uses.
Yeah, that stark analogy for knowledge production, just churning out publications. It shifts the focus from maybe the real quality or relevance of the research and teaching.
And it also affects who's doing the work.
Right. He raises concerns about relying on, underpaid grad students for a lot of the heavy lifting in research and teaching. And then there are these other sort of ethical questions he brings up, like universities investing offshore in tax havens.
Seriously, like the British Virgin Islands.
Yeah, it's an example he gives.
Yeah.
And the potential conflicts of interest that creates. Plus, he critiques academies.
Yes, the dense jargon.
That impenetrable writing style you sometimes see. He suggests it can sometimes be a way to mask maybe the lack of substance in the ideas themselves. Makes it hard to evaluate.
It all sounds like it creates a disconnect from reality, maybe.
That's a really important consequence he discusses. This kind of mediocrity can lead to a weird, dislocated relationship with the actual world. He references Gunther Anders here, who wrote about television.
How does TV fit in?
Anders saw TV not as bringing people together, but as a demassification force. It kind of isolates you, but feeds you this pre-digested, simplified version of reality.
So it feels like you're connected, but you're actually getting this filtered view, and you're alone with it.
Exactly. The medium itself, needing things to be quick and easily understood, it struggles with nuance, with complex thought. And that pseudo-intimacy with presenters, it can discourage you from actually engaging critically with the real messy world.
Makes sense. It's hard to have a deep debate in a soundbite.
Very hard.
So does this logic, the focus on the average, the system maintenance, does it bleed into culture and art too?
He argues it absolutely does. Things like arts councils, government funding bodies, they can end up acting like partners with big business.
How so?
Offering tax breaks for cultural investments, for example.
Yeah.
The risk is that art stops being about challenging things or exploring beauty and becomes more about, boosting the economy or reinforcing a kind of political sameness.
So the artist becomes less of a critic and more of a tool. Or like a social worker, almost.
That's a phrase he uses,
Yeah.
especially in crises. The artist might be called on to show support, offer comfort, which can kind of smooth over the political edges of the event instead of analyzing it critically.
And even subversive art can get co-opted.
Right. It gets brought into the museums, into the institutions, and contained. It loses its edge. He contrasts that with art that really does make you uncomfortable. It makes you think like Mitch Mitchell's work, using cardboard shipping containers.
What did that do?
It just confronts you with the sheer scale of global trade, the hidden logistics of it all. It makes you see something familiar in a totally new, unsettling way. That's the kind of art he values, the kind that productively unsettles.
Okay, this all sounds, a bit bleak. Does Deneault offer any way out? Any signs of resistance?
He acknowledges it's tough, for
Okay.
sure. But he does point to some possibilities. Like, he mentions Denis de Rougemont's idea of the unemployed intellectual.
Meaning someone outside the system?
Yeah, someone not tied to an institution who might have more freedom for truly disinterested critical thought because they aren't playing the game.
Okay.
And he also suggests that, maybe ironically, precarious contract teachers in universities, the ones without job security, might actually be freer to ask the awkward questions.
Because they have less to lose by challenging the norms.
That seems to be the idea. They're less invested in climbing that particular ladder. And he also brings in Jacques Rancière.
What's his contribution?
Rancière's idea that intelligence is shared, it's not just held by the official experts. Important insights can come from anyone, regardless of their status.
So valuing voices outside the established hierarchy.
Exactly. Deneault also touches on revolution, not necessarily in the dramatic sense, but as the act of ending things that harm the common good. He doesn't really give a roadmap, though.
And he mentions the extreme center in politics.
Yes, this blurring of traditional left and right, which can make it really hard to form a clear opposition because the center ground seems to absorb everything. And finally, he sort of categorizes people's reactions. You have those who just withdraw, those who are mediocre but don't realize it, and then those who are zealously mediocre, actively enforcing the norms.
That's quite the typology. Okay, we've covered a lot of territory. If you had to boil it down, what's the main thing you want people listening to take away from this?
I think the core insight is that mediocrity, as Deneault presents it, isn't just about individuals lacking talent, it's systemic. It's baked into how our institutions often work, subtly shaping behavior.
Right, and why should this matter to, someone listening right now?
Because understanding this dynamic, this game, can give you a really powerful lens to look at your own life, your workplace, your education, politics, the culture around you. You start seeing these patterns.
Makes sense. So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Just consider, where might these principles of mediocrity be operating in your world?
Yeah, what are the pressures to conform where you are? What are the risks or maybe even the hidden rewards of not playing along?
It's definitely something to chew on. And if this sparked your interest, checking out Alain Deneault's book, Mediocracy itself, could be the next step.
Absolutely. Because just becoming aware, having that critical lens, that's really the first step. It's where the potential to maybe push back, even in small ways, begins.